100 of the biggest Xbox controversies, missteps, mistakes, or just general moments that had made fans raise an eyebrow. Here on RocketSoft, we're pretty big Xbox fans, being Xbox users since our childhood. But that doesn't change the fact that we realize we've been there for the good, the bad, and the dumb. And in this video, we have literally everything pretty much covered. To start things off, let's go back to the very beginning with the Xbox original from 2001. While Xbox has definitely gained a lot of its biggest criticisms in its later years of being out, that didn't necessarily stop the original Xbox from catching some heat and discussion early on either. For instance, when the Xbox originally first released, there was a lot of discussion about the controller. I mean, this first controller, known as the Duke, was definitely bulkier than the very popular DualShock controller that PlayStation had. And sure, this was a time where the Dreamcast controller was a thing and Nintendo 64 had an interesting controller, but it was weird that they came into the gate with something as bulky as this. Now, to this day, some people still stand by that controller, and they think that that's the greatest controller of all time, and more power to them. But for mainstream markets, it was definitely an eyebrow-raising scenario. They later redid the controller for the original Xbox and released that, which I think more people were more accepting of in general. There was also a few other interesting things about the controller, like the fact that it had a black and white button, which later would be changed to bumpers when the Xbox 360 came around. Also, this was during the rise of online gaming, and OG Xbox Live was a really big deal, but it was a paid service where PlayStation 2 also would get online support, and its online support was free. Surprisingly though, Xbox completely dominated, even though their service was a monthly subscription, but they also had Halo 2, which was groundbreaking at its time. Now, of course, Xbox had to come out swinging because it was jumping into an already intense console war. Before the Xbox even existed, Microsoft was interested in purchasing Nintendo, and Nintendo was like, LOL, no. So, Nintendo being one of their competitors, they had to try to hit them where it hurt, and they ended up acquiring Rareware, which was one of Nintendo's closest second-party developers for their consoles. This now meant that a ton of IPs like Banjo-Kazooie, Conker the Squirrel, Perfect Dark would now be housed under Xbox. The criticism, though, came from what Xbox did with these IPs moving forward. We'll talk about some of these soon, but Conker the Squirrel definitely got a rough experience being the first game to release on an Xbox console. It got a re-release of the original game, but with enhanced graphics, which were definitely subject of criticism across the board for some fans. Now, there's always people who'll be nostalgic towards the Xbox version of the game, which looks dramatically different. And there were some improvements to this N64 game brought to the Xbox, like online capabilities, but I think the general consensus always felt that the original Conker game looked better than the Xbox re-release. But if I'm wrong about this, let me know in the comments if you feel differently. Another thing, PlayStation 2 had a DVD player built in, which was a huge selling point for a ton of families. Xbox had the capability to play DVDs, but you had to buy a special DVD pack that came with a remote and a receiver kit, so it would have the proper codec licenses or something like that. The original Xbox also got some criticism because the controller's cable length wasn't as long as it likely could have been. Having a relatively short cable length, it restricted the distance between consoles and players, which led to some fans expressing frustration with their Xbox. The original Xbox also had a staggered release schedule across different regions, which resulted in limited availability in certain countries, leading frustration among gamers who had to wait extended periods or resort to importing consoles as the delay releases limited their access to the platform and its games. Okay, this one wasn't really controversial from a fan base perspective, but apparently Xbox tried to have this commercial air and it got banned in the UK. So it's just one of those banned commercials that's posted online nowadays. I don't know, I always thought it was kind of funny. In 2010, just 5 years after the Xbox 360 released, it was announced that all online support for the original Xbox servers would shut down, which meant Halo 2, one of the most popular Xbox Live games on the original Xbox, would also be shutting down. And this was not met with support from the community. Many players refused to turn off their games and stayed standing in Halo 2 for 3 weeks after the server end date. But ultimately, the biggest criticism was the fact that with the Xbox Xbox Live shutdown, many games would essentially be unplayable. There wouldn't be a way for players to go back and experience those games anymore, especially Halo 2. The multiplayer servers would be shut down, and that would be it. It wouldn't be until 4 years later, when the Master Chief Collection would release, that players would be able to play Halo 2 online again, unless you used some tunneling service like X-Link Kai to try to makeshift your own connections to play against other Halo 2 players. I mean, technically Halo 2 could still be played on the Vista port, but that was a criticized entity in itself because, first of all, it was exclusively compatible with Windows Vista. The port wasn't as accurate as the original version of Halo 2, and the servers weren't really all that great connectivity-wise, always leaving Halo 2 Vista to have this negative connotation surrounding it over the years. Dead or Alive Extreme Beach Volleyball had some controversy, which was an Xbox exclusive game. It sparked controversy due to its focus of, quote, scantily clad female characters and sexualized content. The game drew criticism for its objectification of women and seen by some as an example of the industry's portrayal of female characters in a problematic manner, but since it was an Xbox exclusive title, people also wanted to criticize Xbox for this. But even with the Xbox 360 releasing a year early, things definitely weren't smooth sailing. We all know about the technical problems the Xbox 360 had, like the red ring of death.
I was mad as I'm like, get this fixed or I'm leaving.
Which of course was severe hardware failure, mostly attributed to an internal overheating issue. The 360 had this compact form factor, which led to inadequate cooling for the powerful hardware components inside. And even with the cooling systems built in, like the heat sinks and fans, it wasn't enough to dissipate the generated heat. And over the course of normal use with the console, little cracks would develop within the solder units known as cold solder joints, which weakened the connection, resulting in various hardware malfunctions, including the red ring of death. Now, this issue became widespread. It affected a significant number of Xbox 360 consoles to the point where Microsoft even acknowledged the problem and implemented various solutions to address it. They extended the warranty for affected consoles, offered free repairs or replacements, and eventually made hardware revisions to improve the system's reliability, including a full-on redesign of the console in 2010. But the red ring of death is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to hardware failures that the Xbox 360 had. The Xbox 360 was notorious for being known to scratch players' discs and create these rings around the disc that essentially left the games unplayable. This led to a class action lawsuit, some investigations, and ultimately Xbox doubled down on their stance that it was the user's fault when discs are damaged because there's multiple warnings to not move the console while a disc is inside. A year after the release of the Xbox 360, there was an update released November 1st, 2006 that was actually known to brick some users' consoles, though this update only affected a certain number of consoles, and since Microsoft already extended the warranty on 360s to a year from the original 90 days, a lot of these situations did get resolved or settled. Also, in 2008, after the launch of the new Xbox experience, which was a dashboard overhaul, some users reported that their consoles were not reading optical media properly, and some had reported that audio from HDMI connections would not work, and it seemed like these affected users had to wait until a new update in February 2009, 3 months later, would patch these issues. The early days of the Xbox 360 were pretty unique too. There were a lot of peripherals and ideas for the console that released that never really caught on. Like, for instance, since the Xbox 360 pushed to the market a year earlier than the Wii and the PlayStation 3, the 360 only supported regular DVD playback, while the PlayStation 3 had Blu-ray built in. So this triggered a response from Microsoft to try to compete directly with this feature by announcing that they would be supporting HD DVDs instead of Blu-rays and would release an extra peripheral known as an HD DVD player. Now, this was likely because Microsoft had formed a partnership with Toshiba alongside other companies supporting HD DVDs, and essentially this would strengthen the market against Blu-ray, which was Sony's proprietary platform. Also, at the time, HD DVDs were perceived as a more affordable option compared to Blu-rays, and Microsoft, wanting to keep the Xbox 360 competitive, thought that making a cheaper peripheral would be more appealing than having to go through the process of figuring out what to do with Blu-ray. However, despite Microsoft's initial support for HD DVD, the format war between HD DVD and Blu-ray intensified. Eventually, Blu-ray format emerged as the dominant choice for high-definition content, though Xbox had also used this time to leverage themselves as a digital distribution platform as well. Some speculate speculate that the HD DVD peripheral was just used as a in-between distraction for what Microsoft really had their eyes on, which was, of course, the digital distribution of things. Still, the HD DVD peripheral was a weird time for Xbox fans. Xbox did other things with the 360 too, like faceplates, which was interesting. Now, in general, faceplates were planned to be this big way to customize your console, but when they actually released different faceplates, there was kind of a limited demand for them. Microsoft likely observed that only a small percentage of users were purchasing and using faceplates, making it economically unviable to continue producing and supporting them long term. So after the short run that these things had, they were discontinued. And while in general it seemed like Xbox had to cut a lot of corners to get out to market a year before PlayStation and Nintendo would get their next consoles out, it definitely at times felt like some decisions weren't necessarily thought all the way through. Like, for instance, when the Xbox 360 released, there was two models available: the Xbox 360 Core system, which was only $299, or the Xbox 360 Pro bundle, which was $100 more. Now, the obvious choice for everyone was to get the Pro version of the bundle, because the core version was actually kind of a ripoff, surprisingly. This version didn't come with a hard drive, which was already $100 if you were to buy it on its own. It only had a wired controller. It only came with a composite video cable for standard definition resolutions. And in general, if you were picking up this version of the 360, you would probably need to upgrade something like the hard drive and maybe get a wireless controller, which would have been, at that point, $150 more than what you just spent. So the Pro version was obviously the better option, and it made sense. This version got discontinued and replaced with the arcade bundle, which was definitely a better bundle. But you know what? There still were some really great things about the Xbox 360 compared to the competitors at its time. In 2008, it was the first of the video game platforms to get Netflix built in on it, and back in the day, you could even watch Netflix with your friends through Xbox Live. It would sync it up for you. You could even see your little avatars running around down there to watch the film. It was a really cool feature. And then Xbox decided to discontinue this version of Netflix a few years later and just put the standard Netflix experience that was universal across everything else. Dang. The Xbox 360 had some other interesting decisions that were made when they changed the Xbox 360 dashboard multiple times. Now, the OG blades were really popular and cool, so there was already a little bit of backlash when they changed it to the Xbox NXE dashboard design, but in 2011, they changed it again to a Metro dashboard design, which changed a lot of the menus to this bright white dashboard style versus the darker style it had previously. For gamers, this was actually kind of uncomfortable because if you're in the middle of a game, you open up your dashboard to accept a friend request or something like that, and you get this bright white light just flashbanging your room real quick all of a sudden. There's a reason nowadays dark themes are so popular, and I feel like such a subtle change really was a bad decision for the Xbox 360 days. Now, some of you remember the Xbox Live days during the 360 era. It was really the Wild West out there. Voice chats in games were crazy, and there was an Xbox enforcement team there to try to have some sort of law in this lawless land, but it seems like for the most part Xbox enforcement has never accurately worked. While originally it seemed like Xbox enforcement existed mostly just to try to ban people who were JTagging or modding their Xboxes, some players who were not involved in any type of cheating or modding were getting banned from their Xbox devices, saying that they would be unbanned in December of 9,999, and over time the Xbox enforcement has shifted into a more automated system, which equally doesn't work all that well. We were playing Rainbow Six Siege with our friend Vancha one time. It was a ranked game. It was really heated. Double overtime, we get a teammate who jumps off of the building, dies, and then we end up losing the entire game because of it. Vancha was curious what that strategy was, sent a message to our teammate, "Why did you kill yourself?" Bam! Right there and then, Vancha got hit with a 24-hour communication ban because of those words in order. Then on the flip side, some people have shown they've been able to get their bans reduced to a warning by just sending a message through the Xbox enforcement site, just filling in nonsensical things and getting an automatic reduction of their ban to just a warning. Back in the Modern Warfare 2 days, there was another instance that picked up a lot of controversy too. There was a video that went viral back in 2010, which supposedly showcased an Xbox moderator being corrupt with power. Now, this video actually edited out a lot of context for what really happened in that Modern Warfare 2 lobby, but one of the Xbox enforcement team members, known as the Pro, was shown in the video allegedly threatening and abusing his power and just showcasing generally toxic behavior.
Lupo, I don't care. Feel free to forward it to BillG@Microsoft.com. Knock yourself out. Because I'm not going to lose anything, my friend. You, sir, are going to lose the ability to talk on Xbox Live.
Now, the video was formed in a way where it looked like the Pro was just generally threatening to abuse and ban anybody who just like talked bad to him, but really he was initially just targeting someone who was actually known for cheating and hacking in Modern Warfare 2. So this story actually was kind of wild. Major Nelson even talked about it on Twitter during the time, and there was a lot of confusion. Xbox seemed to double down that the video was taken completely out of context and the Pro was banning someone who was hacking. However, despite the fact that the video was edited down, there was an investigation launched following the video, and while the video itself didn't show any wrongdoings, they did uncover that the Pro had indeed banned over 700 individuals during his 6-year tenure with Xbox Live enforcement. The story itself is really interesting, and YouTuber Sacramento Love did a really good deep dive on the story, so make sure you check it out after this video if you're interested in this still. There's also some other interesting enforcement type situations that popped up over the years that caused some backlash with Xbox. For instance, Xbox was cracking down on gamer tags having inappropriate terminology in them, but also banned anybody for having the word gay in their bio or gamer tag. The Xbox 360 didn't have full-on backwards compatibility, but it did have a large library of Xbox original games that could be played on the Xbox 360. However, sometimes the games would play weirdly when used on a 360. For instance, Halo 2 was a prime example of this, where the game mostly worked, however sometimes this weird screen burning effect would appear. It only seemed to happen on Xbox 360s though, so it's kind of an odd thing to happen. Banjo-Kazooie and Banjo-Tooie were two very popular Nintendo 64 games made by Rare, and after Xbox acquired the company, many fans were excited to see Banjo one day make its way to the Xbox 360, and in a huge marketing push, plus a big reveal, Banjo-Kazooie was back for Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts and looked different. Very blocky for some reason. There was definitely a big controversy behind the redesign of these characters, and when Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts did release, the game took gameplay in a completely different direction. Some people really did enjoy this game and have nostalgic love for it, but when it came to the fans who were expecting a Banjo-Kazooie game, well, they were pretty disappointed. It seemed like with the acquisition of Rare, Xbox really struggled to figure out what to do with a lot of the Rare titles. We did get Perfect Dark Zero as a launch title for the Xbox 360, which was a prequel to the original Perfect Dark game, though this game failed to live up to the expectation and hype that Perfect Dark on the N64 had. The story was a bit weird, and the character Joanna just felt a whole lot less professional than the more polished Joanna Dark in the original Perfect Dark games. It also seemed like at one point Xbox thought that with the acquisition of Rare, they would be able to re-release GoldenEye. They went ahead and greenlit an entire remake of the game that was practically finished before Xbox realized that there was a lot of loopholes when it came to the publishing rights of GoldenEye. It's speculated that for the GoldenEye remake to actually release, they would probably need to have the rights from Rare, which they had, Nintendo, one of their biggest competitors, and Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, the film production company that owned the rights to James Bond. So this whole project was canceled, and the same licensing issue is partially likely the reason why Nintendo wasn't able to do a true-to-form remake of GoldenEye when they partnered up with Activision, as they didn't have the okay from Rareware. So in turn, the GoldenEye that released on the Wii was this different game based on the film version of GoldenEye. It wouldn't be until years later that the entirety of this GoldenEye remake would be leaked online and people were able to play it on modded Xbox 360 consoles. And more recently, for the first time since the original N64 release, the original GoldenEye would be released as a part of an agreement between the film distributor, Xbox, and Nintendo, where Xbox was allowed to put GoldenEye on Game Pass, though they're not allowed to sell the game independently, and Nintendo is allowed to put the game on their Nintendo Switch Online Pass. Once again, not allowed to sell the game independently. People speculate that that deal likely also meant that the games had to be identical, so Xbox couldn't put their finished remake on the Game Pass as well. But hey, at least after all of that, it's finally playable on a different console. Now, it seems like GoldenEye wasn't a complete loss though with that full ground up remake that they did, because the technology likely was used for Perfect Dark, which Xbox was able to re-release in a upscaled remastered form, which took the original source code of the game and ran it through a new engine and added some things like online functionality, which was really cool actually. Nowadays, you can have an integration with your Xbox through PC. If you're primarily a PC player, you can have your Xbox Live account there, you can use Game Pass, but the early days of this cross-platform functionality for Xbox was really weird. It seemed like some ideas were there early, like the introduction of Windows Live, which used the Live moniker from Xbox and would be a platform for certain PC games to release, except oftentimes it didn't work properly or well at all, and there was a lot of outcry from PC players who pointed out that this stuff wasn't very good. There was even plans to charge users the same price for Windows Live to play games online the same way that Xbox Live charged games, though that would be dropped after a ton of backlash. And there was big controversies around the Windows Live platform when games like Dark Souls or GTA 4 released for PC on the Windows Live platform. There was some connectivity, though it was weird, like you could message using the Windows Live Messenger, your Xbox, and there were some achievements for Windows Live games, but it would be years before Windows Live and the whole Xbox integration for PC players actually became something not the worst thing ever. There were also some other interesting things that came during the Xbox 360's era, like beacons, a tool that would let your friends know that you're wanting to play a game with them. It was really pointless, honestly. It was like an early stage looking for group post, but it would only go to your friends when they loaded up a game, and you could set beacons for single player games, which didn't even make sense. And this feature was not adopted, and it's probably one of the most forgotten Xbox 360 features. The Xbox 360 also ran into some heat with the way that they handled some of the DLC for certain games, where on platforms like PC, DLC sometimes would be free. This happened in the case of Left 4 Dead and Call of Duty World at War, but on Xbox, players had to pay more money, which seemed pretty unfair considering you're already paying for Xbox Live, than to also have to pay for the DLC when the other platforms you don't have to pay a live fee and the DLC was free. Instead of Xbox not charging for DLC in certain instances, it seemed like PC just caught up and started charging for DLC, but hey, it was a weird time in that early 2007, 2008, 2009 era. Then towards the end of the Xbox 360 era, Xbox started to get a reputation for maybe getting a little bit too comfortable with how well the Xbox 360 was doing. Towards the end, it still had a pretty big market share over Sony's PlayStation 3, but the Nintendo Wii had come out of nowhere altogether with how successful that thing ended up being. It seemed like Xbox then wanted to shift their attention to trying to launch a competitor for the Nintendo Wii and put a ton of money into the Kinect for the Xbox 360, which had some of the craziest propaganda for a console release when that thing released. Like, I'm pretty sure most of these people are paid that were hyping up the Kinect as like the biggest thing ever.
It's beautiful, it's rich, it's interactive, and it feels like a character you really want to get to know.
Have you seen anything else for Kinect that you think is particularly cool?
The dance game.
I'm not a big gamer, so I just like that it seems like it would be easy.
Are you excited about this?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Now, the Kinect did end up being a profitable launch, but I think once players actually got their hands on the Kinect, the hype had died down pretty quickly, realizing that it was just kind of a gimmicky toy. The Kinect never fully lived up to the expectation of what players thought the Kinect would be. Matter of fact, during those Xbox 360 announcements with the Kinect, some of the games that were shown off were really interesting or odd. Like, for instance, they did the Kinectimals debut, which had some kid on stage poorly acting out encounters with the animals, which wasn't really representative of what the game was. And they also showcased a game called Project Milo, which was this game that apparently would have had some future technology or some crazy advanced AI to pull off some of the things that it was suggesting here. And that game really never actually existed as a game. It was just a tech demo showing, I guess, some pipe dream of what maybe one day technology would be able to do.
She's in that pond. Every hand movement is being recognized. Being able to touch fish, being able to swish the water with her hand. Everyone who's experienced it, their hairs are standing up on the back of their head.
There's a couple of really good videos online covering Project Milo that you should check out, but yeah, it was a disaster and false advertising at the very least. Nonetheless, while Xbox was putting all of its attention into launching the Kinect, they were significantly reducing the number of exclusives that they were putting out. We just did a video on every Xbox exclusive, and we were pretty shocked to see how in the early days of the Xbox, there was like 40 exclusive games. And towards the end of the Xbox 360's life, they were dropping down to single digits for exclusive titles that weren't related to the Kinect. This was probably the first crack in Xbox's peak popularity, as PlayStation was doing a lot of moves, putting out a lot of exclusive titles and also cutting the price of their console. PlayStation 3 managed to rapidly catch up to the number of units sold in the twilight years of this generation. This next controversy was kind of a really interesting story, but it made headlines all over the place when the story made its rounds. But in 2011, an 11-year-old kid with autism had his Xbox 360 gamer card relabeled from Xbox themselves to cheater. The mother of the boy was outraged and did a complaint to Microsoft and even went to Seattle's local news station with her testimony. And this segment ended up airing on TV, which is really interesting.
They've stolen his confidence and may end up isolating her autistic son even more now than ever. Jennifer Stenick, the mother of an autistic boy in Edgewood, is outraged at Microsoft Xbox Live for labeling her son a cheater and taking away everything he's earned online.
He got online and it says cheater under his gamer tag, and they wiped up every achievement from every game he's ever owned.
Yeah. They steal my achievements.
But here's the thing, as the story progressed, it turned out that the boy did end up allowing a third party to access his Xbox account in order to gain the recon armor for Halo 3, likely meaning that whoever had access to the account hacked the achievements onto the account, Xbox flagged it, and labeled the account as a cheater. Xbox did eventually do away with the whole labeling your game type or whatever you could do on your gamer card back in the day, where you could do like pro or underground or whatever that meant, and also removed the cheater tag as something that they would put on players who cheated their gamer score. But yeah, this one was just a really interesting time that Xbox took a hit with some bad PR, whether it was justified or not. Also, for a little bit of time, there was an app created so that you could order pizza through Xbox Live. A cool concept. Never really stuck around and became a thing, so it ended up just kind of becoming a meme instead. Also, towards the end of the Xbox 360's life, they introduced the Xbox Live Gold games, which essentially would be free games that you could have added to your library as long as you continue to have your Xbox Live Gold membership. This was a really cool idea, actually, and a cool gift for players who were paying that monthly fee. However, sometimes after a while, there would be games that would show up that were kind of lackluster or were re-releases of games that previously were included in the Games with Gold program. That also caused a little bit of controversy. But oh boy, no company would shoot themselves in the feet as badly as Microsoft did when announcing the next console, the Xbox One.
We believe we can evolve what you love to make it decidedly better and deliver breakthrough innovations.
When it came to discourse surrounding Xbox, the initial announcement and then E3 of 2013 was a pretty bad year for the Xbox brand. Besides the naming conventions of the Xbox One being weird, so much emphasis was put on Xbox and its connectivity to televisions. I mean, it's cool and all, and maybe they were trying to pivot Xbox into being this all-in-one media center, but the people who cared the most about Xbox cared about Xbox for the games. The Xbox One also had an astronomically high price for some reason, likely because they decided to make the Kinect an included and a required part of the system for its launch. This, of course, ended up backfiring heavily on the reputation of Xbox right away. First, there was a huge debacle around the Xbox One and the DRM, stands for Digital Rights Management, but essentially the way that Xbox presented the idea of how the Xbox One would work was that the system would always have to be connected online, and if you connected offline, you would have just 24 hours to get back online before you would lose access to your games. You then would have a list of friends and family that you could share your games with, but the way that it was presented led many fans to fear that Xbox was trying to completely shut out the used game market altogether, which, while nowadays, 10 years later, is much smaller than it once was, back then it was still a very common practice for players to pick up used games at a discounted price and finally get to play them. So just having extra restrictions on how and who you can get your games from left a pretty awful taste in a lot of people's mouths. Okay, and the console has to be always online, and there's a Kinect now required, which is a camera and a microphone, getting announced at the same time that all of that NSA Snowden leak stuff was first really starting to gain media attention, revealing that the US government had like access to people's webcams and whatnot, and there was like a ton of fear. Microsoft being like, yeah, hey, you need this if you want to get the Xbox One. People are just like, yeah, no. Mind you, all of this, and it was still more expensive than the PlayStation 4, and Sony was genius, and they released this video showing how their trade management and DRM system would work. That was just like a huge funny slap in the face to Xbox. Then on top of this, when fans started voicing kind of concern over a lot of these decisions, then Microsoft Studios creative director Adam Orth thought, hey, I'm gonna chime in on Twitter and, you know, settle this. Sorry, I don't get the drama around having an always-on console. Every device now is always on. That's the world we live in. Hashtag deal with it. Then a BioWare developer, Manveer Hare, jumped into the conversation saying, did you learn nothing from Diablo 3 or SimCity? You know, some people's internet goes out, right? Deal with it is a shitty reason. Adam Orth responded with, electricity goes out too. Then Hare responded with, you lived in LA, San Francisco, Seattle, very connected places. Try living in Janesville, Wisconsin, or Blacksburg, Virginia. His response, why on earth would I live there? Yeah, so if your internet is spotty, you should just not live there anymore, was essentially the takeaway. He also tweeted a few more hits back that April, saying, sometimes the electricity goes out. I will not purchase a vacuum cleaner. And also, the mobile reception in the area I live in is spotty and unreliable. I will not buy a mobile phone. Obviously, trying to poke fun at people who were voicing their concern for the Xbox's always-on announcement. Shortly after all of this, Orth ended up leaving Microsoft. It's really unknown whether or not he was fired from Microsoft over this. Microsoft essentially made a brief statement saying that the statements made were not from a spokesperson for Microsoft, and his personal views did not reflect the customer-centric approach that they take with their products, blah, 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 blah. Now, also, during this time, Microsoft had a deal directly with Activision so that with Call of Duty titles, DLC would release on Xbox platforms a month before they would release on PlayStation's platforms. However, it seems like due to possibly the slower sales of the Xbox One and maybe a contract expiring, Activision ended up shifting and made the same deal with PlayStation moving forward, which was a pretty big loss for Xbox, as now the big Call of Duty fans would switch over to PlayStation to get that content sooner. There were a few other things about the Xbox One announcement that just rubbed players the wrong way, like the name, the Xbox One. Yes, this is the third Xbox iteration, but they're calling it the Xbox One because it's supposed to be the all-in-one platform to do everything media, I guess. Besides the interesting choice in a name, they also decided to make the console one of the largest, most unintuitive looking consoles at the time of its initial release. A lot of people making memes comparing it to a VCR, which, I mean, honestly, it was about the size of a VCR. Though while we like to point at the Xbox One as being the tip of the iceberg of bad naming conventions, Xbox never really had the best naming conventions and has caught a lot of criticism over the years across their launches for consoles. Obviously, we get they don't want to have an Xbox 2 competing against a PlayStation 3. It would just make it sound a generation behind. But we get interesting things when it comes to Microsoft, like the Xbox 360. It's the amount of degrees in a box. Is it representing the fact that you can play in 360p resolution? That's not that impressive. Is it because it did two 180s from the original Xbox? I don't know. And I definitely wasn't the only one who raised an eyebrow at the Xbox 360's naming convention. And then also the Xbox Series X and the Xbox Series S. I get it, once again, they're trying to just go for this general Xbox box naming convention, and then like there's a model of each Xbox afterwards with the Series X and the Series S. But once again, nobody just calls it the Xbox. They call it the Xbox Series. That's the way that they always would have called it to denote the difference between this generation and the previous generation. So not having a proper name with it is always weird. We never did get that Xbox 720 everybody thought the next Xbox would one day be called. With the big Rare acquisition, fans had continued to criticize Xbox over the years for not utilizing all these beloved characters that they obtained from Rare themselves. However, finally, in 2014, it was announced that alongside Project Spark, Conker would be coming to the game. Matter of fact, this Project Spark game was supposed to be one of the most revolutionary games of all time, allowing players to create worlds and experiences for other players to get to have. There was multiple episodes planned for Conker the Squirrel, but after the first story released, the rest of the stories for this character were canceled. And due to the falling interest of this game over time, the whole Project Spark idea ended up having future development ceased and the whole project ended, though you can still technically play Project Spark if you wanted to. Oh, but that wasn't it for Conker. No. 2016 would be a big year because we had that Microsoft HoloLens thing that was going to be the big future, and they thought, hey, let's make a game called Young Conker and redesign this beloved character, and oh my god, what did they do? How are people supposed to take projects like Microsoft HoloLens seriously when they think that this is actually a good redesign of the character? There was so much expectation surrounding HoloLens also when it was announced, with the whole Minecraft demonstration showing that, hey, look, you can do Minecraft like this if you want to. And then it never really came into fruition for whatever reason. This, alongside the other major issues that we've already covered, definitely compounded into this reputation Xbox was quickly obtaining for just not being gamer focused. These were really underlying the fact that Xbox and Microsoft were completely detached from the fan base that were primarily gamers. It's always cool to present new and innovative ideas, but for a lot of gamers it felt like that's all they were pitching were ideas and not the core experiences that players had supported Xbox for. It started almost to feel like Xbox's intended audience was less gamers and more lab rats to try out random things. Also, in the early days of the Xbox One, there were still a lot of problems with the Xbox One in just the way that a lot of the features were set up and the design overall. The original controller that first shipped with the Xbox One only had this very specific mid-USB type plug-in that wasn't a full-size USB. You had to put it in the bottom of your controller, so you had to buy specific headsets that had this design on it, or you could buy this expensive adapter. It wouldn't be until years later they would redesign the Xbox controller to allow auxiliary inputs for any microphone to work. The Xbox One also saw some problems with other studios that were making games for the console. Fable Legends was a full-on MMO that was designed to take place in the Fable universe, was pretty far along, already having public playtests going on. The game just got straight up scrapped, canceled, and the studio closed down. Scalebound was a big game that fans were looking forward to. It was revealed to be developed by Platinum Games, who had a ton of great games under their belts. Yeah, that one got scrapped and canceled. Now, after all that talk about the Kinect and how important the Kinect was and how it was an integral piece of Xbox One and why you had to buy it, to make a price drop, they started selling Xbox Ones without the Kinect and eventually discontinued the Kinect altogether, which was probably a smart choice to get consumers to start adopting the Xbox One, but also a slap in the face to all of the early adopters who were willing to spend the extra money because they believed in what the Kinect was supposed to be and what Microsoft was selling with it. Also, if you bought the Xbox One back in 2013, 2013 like I did, you may remember that the user interface was absolutely horrible. Like, it was just completely nonsensical how some of the things worked. Things were slow. Party chat just didn't even work half the time. It was a really, really bad mess day one. Also, this was an era where consoles were becoming more and more used for multimedia purposes, but for some reason Xbox just didn't get a Spotify app on it for a really long time, but instead you were encouraged to subscribe to Xbox Music, which was its own app that eventually was shut down. Also, there was the whole snapping mechanic that was pointed out as an early feature for the Xbox One, where you'd be able to snap between television and your game when you're like loading in or something like that. That was like a feature for a very short time, and then they kind of dropped work on it. It would cause your game to crash a lot of the time when you used it, and eventually they just discontinued the feature altogether. There were also plans for DVR functionality where you would be able to pause, record movies, and have all of that, though you would need to have a bigger hard drive space, so that caused a problem with how Xbox wanted that feature to work, so they ended up not continuing support with that, and you're only able to like limitedly pause for a short amount of time your live television shows, which also defeated the purpose of watching TV while playing games if you're gonna miss out anyways. Now, with the Xbox One, they introduced the whole system where you have to install the game, whether you have it on the disc or you're downloading it from the store first, before you actually get to play the game. Though, after a while this wasn't that popular, they added in a ready-to-play feature, which would allow you to play the game while only part of it was installed. It's actually a decent idea. However, doing so would slow down the installation of the game, and a lot of the times would actually make the game not play correctly. So, if you were still installing the game, sometimes glitches that wouldn't normally occur otherwise could happen, like sounds cutting out or weird visual bugs because the game wasn't fully installed. Also, the Xbox One was criticized for not having backwards compatibility with the Xbox 360, something that Sony also was being criticized for, though eventually Xbox did eventually add some level of backwards compatibility by emulating 360 and original Xbox hardware through the Xbox One, making some of those older games playable again. Also, when Xbox One finally did get that backwards compatibility with the 360, Halo Reach was one of the launch games for that program, and it ran terribly. And people were just like, why? Why would you make this one of the launch games knowing that it runs so badly? Eventually it did get updates though and was able to run better until it finally came out in MCC later on. They also at one point showed off this Xbox One Illuma Room demo, which was, I don't know, like a projector bleeding things off of the screen to make it seem like a bigger environment. I don't know. This was a weird tech demo to show off, especially since it never became an actual thing. So why did they show it to begin with? Now, we mentioned that the Windows side of things, Xbox would slowly try to evolve it and make it more functioning, but man, during this period, there were so many iterations of Xbox apps for Windows that would come and go and be renamed and reused and repurposed. It's really, really confusing to follow how many versions there's been, but I'm sure if you were a PC player trying to keep up with Xbox stuff, you know the struggle that was. Now, a few years earlier, Microsoft also saw the departure of Bungie, who had made the Halo franchise what it was, and in turn started their own studio known as 343 Industries, a studio who has the reputation of regularly failing the Halo fanbase. The first game they released on their own completely was Halo 4, which was already a pretty big departure from what fans expected from a Halo game, and they followed it up with the Master Chief Collection, which released in 2014, and was one of the most disastrous console video game launches of all time. The game completely did not work. It didn't work for years. Sure, there was a few patches that made things kind of better for a bit, but it was the biggest mess in all of Halo history. Without turning this video into an entire 343 controversies video, which we have, by the way, on our channel, another good hour-long watch if you want to check that out. 343 Industries is a branch of Microsoft, so all of their mess-ups are technically Xbox's mess-ups too. Oftentimes, people have pointed out that management has been the biggest issue, and Xbox should have stepped in multiple times a long time ago, but still, the Halo fans are dealing with the same stuff. Also, Microsoft spent a ton of time implementing a new service called TrueSkill back during the Xbox 360 online days that would be evolved and turned into TrueSkill 2, and both developers and players have been pretty critical of the TrueSkill system for not being that great of a skill-based matchmaking system. A lot of fans have pointed to Halo games having to be plagued from the TrueSkill 2 system, specifically the newer iterations, and even developers from the older older Halo games have talked about how they had to jump through hoops to try to avoid using some of the true skill features, just because it's not really that great of a matchmaking system. It doesn't lead to more fun, it leads to more frustration. Also, during the Xbox One era, Xbox was like, hey, you know those avatars that everyone created and bought skins for? We're gonna do that again, except we're gonna make them look like this. And it was terrifying, and I think avatars died shortly after the existence of Avatar 2.0. There's just something creepy about them rather than, I don't know, just chill like this guy was. I miss these days. Also, after the release of Halo 2 for Windows Vista, Halo never made its way onto the PC again, mostly for the public to play. MCC was a mess. Halo 5 released and was quite a bit different from the classic Halo experience, so fans took it upon themselves to modify a Russian-only Halo release for PC players known as Halo Online into a version that PC players would be able to play and relive custom games and matchmaking from Halo 3 days all over again with some cool additions. This was called El Dorito, and it became massively popular amongst its new update release that they did, and then Microsoft stepped in and had to shut it down. And I guess that maybe encouraged Microsoft to eventually think about putting MCC on Xbox, but I think Microsoft was already planning on starting to get more involved on the PC, Xbox, cross-save, cross-progression type thing. The Xbox One's problems didn't stop there either. There was also some resolution and frame rate disparity that some people had noticed. Nowadays you can go back and look at this, but there's been instances where multi-platform games that were released on the Xbox One had lower resolutions or lower frame rates compared to that of the PlayStation 4, which led to debates about how the console's performance capabilities were maybe worse off than what Sony had offered in the PlayStation 4, and whether the hardware in the Xbox was even optimized effectively. Then, to try to generate more hype for Xbox One games that would come out, Microsoft ran into a ton of criticism about the abundance of CGI trailers for games, and also the use of trailers for games that were years and years away from actually launching, something that they're still criticized for to this day. A good example of this is back when they first revealed ReCore. People thought this was a AAA game, but it really was just like a little platforming game that wasn't even a full $60 game. Halo Infinite had a tease years and years before the game actually would see its release. There also were a few class action lawsuits that Xbox found themselves in over the years, like a lawsuit over stick drift in their controllers, and also a lawsuit with the FTC over allegations that Xbox had been unlawfully collecting data from children players, in which Microsoft ended up settling out of court, and because of the settlement, they don't have to admit or deny the allegations. There's also the time that Microsoft tried to raise the prices of Xbox Live, where they wanted to raise the yearly price to $120. And after a ton of outcry and overwhelming condemnation, Microsoft ended up scratching the idea and backpedaled their announcement within just 14 hours of all of the backlash happening. Now, we talked about how in the early days of Xbox, Microsoft was criticized for putting a paywall behind playing games online. And this was something that Xbox would continue to be criticized for over the years, until finally in 2021, Xbox changed their policy, at least on free-to-play games, allowing anybody, whether they had a gold subscription or not, to play games that are already set at a $0 price point, likely because Fortnite was really popular and would make Xbox money either way. Every time someone purchased a skin, they'd get a little bit of that too, and they probably wanted that more than they were willing to try to force people to get Xbox Live. To commemorate the anniversary of the Xbox originally releasing, Microsoft decided to release some special limited run posters based off of the Red Ring of Death, one of the biggest failures of all time. Now they're selling posters to make money off of it, which definitely raised some eyebrows. When the Xbox Series X and S finally released, there were major shortages on day one, causing huge scalping issues. Now, this also affected the PlayStation 5, but Xbox definitely was also in this controversy, as the scalping got pretty bad, and even some companies like GameStop would only sell giant overpriced bundles to try to get the most out of customers willing to dish out more to finally get their hands on the console. On top of that, the launch for the Series X wasn't quite as smooth as maybe originally planned. Halo Infinite was touted as being a launch title for the Xbox Series X and was even printed on the boxes of the games themselves, but Microsoft had to delay Halo Infinite a year because the game, well, it just wasn't finished or ready at all. Also, they were early on teasing that the power of what what the code game Project Scarlet would have, which would turn into the Xbox Series X and S, would make it so that games would never have loading screens again. No more elevator rides where you have to wait for the game to load or something like that.
You're sitting there in the fake elevator because you know that the game's loading in the background. This is just an elevator ride forever.
That's our goal with gaming, is that you don't have those pauses.
We always thought that that was a really interesting claim to make, and shortly after that, they never made a claim like that ever again, but we remembered, and yeah, there's still definitely loading screens nowadays on the Xbox Series X and S. There was a time where Xbox accidentally listed a game for $2,000 on the store called Ball Race 2 Ramp. It was a mistake, I guess. Also, a more recent issue that happened was Xbox accidentally announced the end of the Xbox 360 store and online support. There was a ton of outcry when this was revealed, and then Xbox backpedaled saying, no, we're not ending it. It was an accident. We didn't mean it, or something like that. Okay, this next one's definitely a bigger one, and it's one that's still being talked about right now, but the whole question as to whether or not Xbox is starting to become a monopoly in the game publishing industry. A few years ago, Xbox Game Studios acquired Bethesda Softworks, known for making the Elder Scrolls series, Fallout, and the upcoming Starfield games. They're also a publisher with other studios under that make big releases too, like Wolfenstein and Doom. And while some fans were excited about the potential for exclusive titles and increased support for these studios, others expressed the concerns of the impact on multi-platform releases and potentially more exclusivity in a time where games are starting to become more accessible everywhere. More recently, Xbox has been trying to acquire Activision, the holders of a ton of IPs, and also Call of Duty, and this is like this huge like court thing with the FTC involved, and a lot of back and forth as Sony's been trying to block that, and only time will tell how that ends up going. When the Xbox Series X first was launched, there were some videos making rounds that the Xbox Series X would cause smoke to come out from the top of the console, and these became viral videos, though I think most of them ended up being debunked, but it still hurt the Xbox Series X's reputation a bit for people who didn't know that these are fake. One of the biggest features that the Xbox Series X toted, though, was the fact that you could smart resume your games, meaning you could close out of your game, come back another time, and the game would pick up right where you left off. And this was like the big selling point of the Series X at the time, and it doesn't really work all that well. If you are an Xbox Series X owner, you know exactly what I'm talking about, but in a lot of instances, when you resume your game, the game will glitch out, lag, or have performance issues, or if it's an online game, it'll have some major connectivity issues until you do a fresh reboot on the game, which is already annoying, but there's also not an option to just turn off Smart Resume. So we're stuck dealing with this on a regular day-to-day basis. Also, if you signed up for like the Xbox Console Insider thing that lets you test out new features, it doesn't matter what you're doing. You can have it where it will be like, hey, there's an update, and it will interrupt everything you're doing and make you stop and restart your Xbox, and there's no way to like say, no, please don't do that right now, and you're just unlucky. You have to leave the program altogether if you don't want that to happen. On top of everything else the Xbox Series has run into already, a lot of fans are under the expectation that games should be able to run at 4K 120 frames per second, as that's what was advertised as what would be ready for these games, and that the console would even be 8K ready. Though, lately, it's been revealed that some games can't play at a high frame rate, not even getting 60 frames per second, many games being capped at 30 frames per second, like Redfall, which is a first-party game, and the upcoming Starfield, another first-party game being capped at 30 FPS. For some people, it's not that big of a deal. They're used to playing games at 30 FPS, like The Legend of Zelda on the Switch. But for other people, it's a pretty big deal breaker. And I think at that's a good note to end this video on. Still, despite all of that, Xbox is an interesting console. Game Pass is a great deal, and if you care about some of the franchises that they have the license to, one day you might actually get a new game. You just have to wait years and years. We don't regret being Xbox fans, but man, it's interesting going through the timeline of everything that has ever happened that is kind of not good for Xbox and talking about it. What did you guys think about this video? Are you an Xbox player or a PlayStation player? Let us know in the comments down below. I guess PC or Switch is an option too. Thank you so much to our patrons for making this video even possible. So if you want to see more content like this, maybe consider just either subscribing to our channel to help us or signing up on Patreon and throwing a few extra dollars our way. Otherwise, that's it for today. We'll see you guys all next time with a new video.